Welcome to the Wagon Wheel podcast. A special guest today. And look, there's a question that's come up straight away here from Swami Nathan, who says, Barrett's timekeeping is bordering on the unprofessional. I think that's unfair. I'd like to think that everything about you is bordering on the unprofessional, not
That's
just your
true.
timekeeping. And the other great thing about this is, of course, you're not even on the right podcast. You've missed Uncovered this week, and you've just hijacked Wagon Wheel.
Oh, I look, in my defense, I did log on to the uncovered link, and I was waiting there for you for 3 minutes, wondering why I was early and you weren't already there.
That was after you forgot to download the program that we needed for all this. But it's all good. He's
Sure.
here, everyone. We're okay, and I'm in control of this. I'm gonna press a button and see if this works. Oh, look at this! I'm moving this on the screen,
Cool.
so everyone on YouTube, it's really exciting, and everyone listening to the podcast, it's not. Remember, you can ask questions anytime you want through Patreon. Sign up there and you get all your benefits. Or if you are in the YouTube today, the best way is probably just to do a super chat, and we'll have a look at those at the end. But let us just start with the questions. Oh, look at that. It's all happening. Except
Oh,
I can't see the person's name. Why can't I see the top of my own
I
screen?
can see it.
Here we go. Here we go. Here it is. Ian says, if Alistair Cook was 10 years younger heading into this year's Ashes, would he be Zach Crawley's opening partner or his replacement? Are there two Zach Crawleys in this? Two Alistair Cooks in this scenario? Because I mean, they need two openers, right? It's not
Yeah.
a one-off thing, is it?
And unfortunately, Alistair Cook looks the same as he did 10 years ago. So you can't even say, oh, we'll have the older Alistair Cook look opening the batting with the younger looking Alistair Cook. And in many ways, Alistair Cook uh, looks. I don't know. This is not an. I'm not passing judgments on what Zach Crawley looks like, but Alistair Cook actually looks younger than Zach Crawley, even though he might be 7 or 8 years older than him. I would assume. But
He
that
must be
also.
way older than that, wouldn't he? He'd have to be like 12 or 13 years
Oh
older,
yeah,
wouldn't he?
exactly. Yeah, but
So
he's just ageless. Yeah,
when
Alistair Cook just has that fresh face look that never goes away.
when he retired, I think it was not long after that, we were on tour in the Caribbean, and he was there for the BBC, and I was there for
Mm.
Talksport. And we were all using the same gym. In fact, it was the last time I could say this because Harmy makes this joke all the time. It was the last time Steve Harmison ever used the gym, and afterwards he was
Mhm.
like, "What am I doing? I don't want to do this anymore." But Cookie was in the gym with us, and I was watching him compared to some of the other recently retired athletes, and you were thinking he doesn't really look recently retired. He looks like he
Mm.
could go out now and bat for 4 days in Chennai if he had to. A remarkable fit player, but yeah, I mean, obviously my memory of Alistair Cook was that very early on, key people in cricket thought he was going to be the next big thing. I don't.
Mm.
I haven't really seen anyone say that about Zach Crawley. I remember Sean
Mm.
Pollock coming into the commentary booth once and saying to me, "Why have England picked a guy who averages 28 in first class cricket to open the batting?" And then he saw him play and he goes, "Oh, okay, I get it now."
Mm.
And I think most of us kind of feel that, right? That almost like the disconnect between the fact Crawley's never made any runs, but he looks really good. Whereas Cook probably didn't look as good, but maybe was a little bit, well, looked like he could make runs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you saw those. I think two innings that stand out from Zach Crawley for me. One I watched on television. I think it was the Ahmedabad Test when he made what 50 in nearly felt like 10 minutes
Yep.
because he kept hitting every ball for four, and then he got out, and then everybody else got out, and the match was over in a day and a half. That inning stands out, and also I think it was in Sydney. You know how it is with us, right, Jared? You
Mm.
remember matches that you weren't covering, but you don't remember matches that you were covering. So I'm going to stick my neck out and say it was a Sydney Test when again he hit a few boundaries and then looked good and then got out. So this is also when England was so unsure about their top order. They had Hasim Hamid and Rory Burns opening, and then Crawley came in, and
Mm.
it was all over the place. So yeah, I mean, yeah, he does look really good. But there are two types of really good-looking batters in cricket, right? One, the Rohit Sharma type, who just are so easy on the eye, but also they look easy on the eye even when they get out.
Mm.
Strangely, but with Zach Crawley, yes, he looks very good when he plays those drives and he flicks the ball away, or even some of his other shots on the onside. but then he gets squared up by the most random of deliveries, and he starts flashing at deliveries which he doesn't have to. So he doesn't look very good when he gets out, I think, which is what makes and it's all about perception. It's all about aesthetics, cricket anyway, as a sport. So I think it goes against Zach Crawley, just the way he gets out. So if anything, maybe if he works on getting out in a cleaner, in a neater fashion, maybe people will start giving him a bit more time. Look, having said that, he's played already 28 test matches.
I don't think anyone who's ever averaged this low for a major test nation has ever had as much time as him. It's remarkable. But the interesting thing is that he looks so good because he can drive everything on the up, right? But he also goes out because he drives everything on the up, right?
Exactly,
so they picked him for this skill, which doesn't always translate.
I did though read a piece.
I've changed questions, man. Look at the screen.
Oh, sorry, we moved on from Zach Crawley. Sorry, I should keep. This is not a whole show about Zach Crawley. I forget. No, I'm a little rusty. I'm sorry.
One day we'll do that. Bloody Bugger says, would you change the number of balls in an over? I personally would prefer a longer over. So everyone I've ever talked to said that played under 6 balls and 8 balls seemed to suggest that 8 balls was better. But I think the change to 6 balls was probably, other than the fact it was done in some countries already, but I think in Australia, it was probably brought in for advertising as much as anything. I'm not sure if it was a direct Kerry Packer sort of thing, but it just makes more sense for advertising. I think from a cricket perspective, 8 balls makes more sense. From a streaming perspective, from a cable TV perspective, maybe 8 balls makes more sense. But free to air TV, definitely, they probably just think that 6 balls makes more sense. And I can't imagine ever doing less than that because it would be a bit too stop and start. I mean, even the 100 is kind of 10 balls in a row, right?
It is, yeah. I think it also helps you with your multiplication tables, having 6 ball overs. And I'll give you an example of this. The other day, I had my cousin and his family over, and we were actually watching the footy. This is like a few weeks back, and they were using the footy scores to kind of test their kids' multiplication knowledge. They were like, "All right, why do you think that team has 37 points?" So 6 into 6 plus 1. And look, I think if you have watched cricket, if you followed cricket, if there's one number we know all the multiplication tables for, it's 6 because that's how I aced math based on cricketing stats while growing up. But if whenever it was an odd number, I was lost because cricket doesn't do odd numbers too well if you think about it.
I think most people in the southern parts of Australia, especially most men, are probably experts. Probably the first thing you learn as a young boy is your 6 times tables, just because you need to know the footy scores, and you obviously, in cricket it comes in quite handy as well. So no, I'm 100% with you. I'm also very, very good at geography thanks to the NBA. So people who say you can't learn anything from sport, it's just not true.
No, bullshit.
Satchmo says, based on video footage, is it a miracle that nobody was killed when facing Jeff Thompson without a helmet on uneven surfaces in Australia in the mid-1970s? I don't think it was uneven surfaces. I think by that stage, pitches were pretty good. There was a guy that Christian Ryan wrote about did he have his eyeball detached? Or was it his retina detached when he got hit? I can't remember if it was the chip, because I can't remember what this bone is, but whatever the bone is just under the eye, if it comes out, the eyeball pops out. And then there's another one, I think, when your retina gets detached. So there were certainly injuries like that happened. But I think, looking back on it, probably from Tyson all the way through to the West Indian bowlers all coming on, we're probably lucky that we didn't have a lot more deaths and big injuries, because there were certainly a lot of people played. You'll know about, is it the West Indian batter Herbert Chang, whose family believe that he got hit on the head so many times facing the West Indians at home, because obviously didn't play them internationally, that caused him long-term injuries. So there are certainly batters who maybe have less obvious injuries, but certainly something that went on with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I started off as an interview, but I ended up being a whole day with Len Pascoe. This is many years ago. And he told me about the Pascoe-Thomo ward in the local hospital when they were playing club cricket together, and they would hit a lot of guys. And it was also a very strange start to the interview. I never met Lenny Pascoe before that. So He invited me home, and the moment I walked into his really nice house by the water somewhere in Sydney, I don't know where now, from memory, he had his laptop on his long dining table. And the moment I walked in, he just turned his laptop and he pressed play. I'm not kidding. This was like, hey mate, yeah, come in. And then the next thing he did was press play on his laptop on YouTube. There was a YouTube link on, and it was him hitting Mohinder Amarnath a few times. And oh no, Sandeep Patil, sorry, Sandeep Patil on the head. And I was like, is he trying to see if I'm Indian? Like, that was the strangest welcome to anyone's house I've ever received. But yeah, I mean, they did speak about hitting a lot of people when they were playing slightly junior level cricket. But I think with Jeff Thompson, I've always thought some guys with odd bowling actions, or bowling actions where you can't really pick where the ball is going, like a Sean Tate or a Jeff Thompson, or a Patrick Patterson, or I think those people are all end up being more dangerous, right? Like it's those guys who hit more guys, and it's not always about how fast you bowl. It's about the when you pick up the ball, and yes, the surfaces have a lot to do with it. I mean, I'll still argue that even though people think Jofra Archer's spell to Steve Smith at Lord's was the most terrifying thing they've ever seen, but the pitch had a lot to do with it. The ball that hit Steve Smith didn't get up. It wasn't like the snorter that hit him while he was standing up. So yeah, the uneven surfaces do lead to a lot of people getting hit. But also odd bowling actions where you don't know when the ball's being released. But you're right. I mean, we've gotten so used to seeing batters with their heads covered, like with helmets and such high quality helmets these days. And then when you look at cricket from the 60s and 70s, it just looks scary, doesn't it? It looks like, wait, how was this even allowed? But that's just us who've grown up in the 90s and the 2000s, kind of using our knowledge from here and trying to look at cricket from that perspective. So it's strange. I don't know, but people who played in that era, I mean, Sunil Gavaskar and those guys take a lot of pride having faced those guys without a proper helmet.
It is also worth looking at, and Jeff Lawson hates it when I mention this, but if you do look at the speed bowling competition, they flew out 12 fastest bowlers in the world, and there were 4 guys who didn't crack 130 kilometers per hour in that competition. So that's 80 miles an hour. There were very fast bowlers, but there weren't a lot of very fast bowlers. Yeah. So I'm more than happy to say that Jeff Thompson is still probably one of the quickest of all time, and Michael Holding would still be fairly fast in this era, and a few of those other guys. But like Michael Holding would be a more normal paced fast bowler now. And so I do think from that perspective, you have to understand that, yes. And look, I think the club cricket story, that's why I brought up the Christian Ryan one, because that was a club cricket story. I think that's where it was absolutely ridiculous. And we've heard also, there's heaps of stories about that in with West Indians bowling in Lancashire leagues and Staffordshire League and that, and people just who shouldn't have been on the field with guys of that pace. Nadika says, where would you rank today's all-time great all-rounders? Shakib, Jadeja, and Stokes among the 4 great all-rounders of the 80s. Ooh. I like it. That's a twist. I wasn't expecting that. I think Richard Hadley's case for being a great all-rounder is slightly exaggerated. I think he was a better bat than Shane Warne, perhaps, but I'm not sure. Like his 100 was not gifted to him is the wrong way of putting it, but basically the West Indies had given up on that Test match. When you look at it, first class record was pretty good. There's no doubt he could bat. I don't think that's the case, but I think he has the weakest claim of those all-rounders. Botham's interesting because Botham basically has the best record in the world for a couple of years, and then the rest of his career is a little bit more average than that. Also, that start of his career, I don't think he played against the West Indies at that point, or maybe I'm misremembering it. Maybe he hadn't played them very much, and his record after playing the West Indies is not as good. But I would still think that Botham has Stokes covered if you're looking at seam bowling all-rounders. I think Kapil Dev is certainly not on the level of batting that Shakib, Jadeja, or Imran Khan is. But the fact that Kapil Dev has his bowling record and mostly bowled in India as a seam bowler, I find it hard to not boost his record there. And Imran Khan was probably... I think Imran Khan's the best of that lot. And I think Jadeja can probably go up towards that Imran Khan level, whereas I don't. Well, Shakib's pretty much finished, isn't he? And Stokes is not. I don't think Stokes is quite on the level of. He'd probably be more on that maybe Hadley level. Is that
Yeah.
fair to say? I don't know.
I mean, by definition, an all-rounder or a high-level all-rounder would be someone who could play in any side as both, or as a
Mm.
specialist batter or a specialist bowler. So even if you break it down in that fashion, I mean, Ben Stokes has played as a specialist batter at times. We've seen that over the
Mm.
years. But would you pick him as a specialist bowler?
It's
Not
interesting.
always.
I mean, this is the argument with. You could have this with maybe Hadley, but certainly with Kapil Dev. When you look at their batting records, they're not particularly great, right? Overall. And Botham's maybe even another one. But having said that, they were playing like all-rounders, right? Like
Yes.
there is a freedom that you get with an all-rounder. Whereas Jadeja and Imran Khan are very different because they actually get better with their second skill over time. Do you know what I mean? They actually really,
Yeah.
really legitimately improve. See, I think Shakib gets in the Bangladesh side as a batter or as a bowler. I think that's
Yes.
very, very fair.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure there's any other player on that. Like, would Imran Khan, even at his peak in his batting, would he have been picked as a batter? I don't know. Right? Would both of them have been picked as a number 6 if he couldn't bowl? I don't. Maybe he skips in. I don't think Kapil Dev would have been picked in the top 6, and Jadeja certainly wouldn't have been most of his career. Although you could argue a bit like Imran Khan, maybe at his peak.
I think it's also need based, right? When you talk about all rounders or any position for that matter in sport and especially in cricket, it also depends on what your team needs. And what if there are like 2 or 3? Like, just look at the recent Australia tour of India. Like, India had 3 spinners who could all make test centuries on their day. So that kind of makes Jadeja the best of those 3 in terms of just pure all round talent, or in terms of where he bats. So he obviously batted higher than Akshar Patel and Ashwin. He was batting 5 towards the end of that series. So that makes him the premier all-rounder in that side. But it is also very needs-based. Obviously, it gets him the nod ahead of our Ashwin whenever they play overseas, or it has in the last couple of years. His batting and his fielding kind of come into the picture. So I think it's also about that. But I guess with all-rounders, you also have to look at impact, the kind of innings that they play. I mean, Kapil Dev single-handedly turned games for India with the bat. I mean, Lee obviously did it with the ball, but with the bat as well, right? I mean, whether it's the World Cup knocks, so there are so many. I mean, so many knocks all around, and he got hundreds everywhere, or significant knocks were played all around the world. Similarly with Imran Khan, Richard Hadley, yes, I mean he was consistent enough to be called an all-rounder, I guess, but I can't recall too many impact innings that he produced with the bat. Maybe a handful, but not as many as a Kapil Dev, or definitely not Ian Botham or Imran Khan. So
I think you're right. I don't think he approaches them. I mean, you might say that he's a better bowler than all those other guys, so perhaps maybe he goes up. But even then, I'm not sure he was a particularly better bowler than Imran Khan. I'll say this. Jadeja is one of 3 players, I think, at the moment who has a bowling average under 25 and a batting average over 35. And I think the other 2 are Imran Khan and Keith Miller. That on its own is, I mean, that means you're not just a good bowler at that point, you're an elite bowler. And then that batting, and we know that that's largely batting in the second half of his career. I think that Jadeja certainly would, I don't think he's as good as Imran Khan, but I also think it's worth having him in that discussion. And if he plays at this level for another 5 years with a bat and a ball, maybe he is. He's probably he's definitely a better fielder than Imran Khan. Throughout. It's hard because you and I grew up with Imran Khan not particularly moving well in the field, but obviously he was a brilliant athlete when he was younger and wasn't moving quite well. By the end, he just sort of sat at mid-off, is my memory, and never moved. But look, I think that Shakib's the really, really tricky one, only because he's played for a poorer team. But when you look at his record, it's hard to find holes in it. I was doing it again recently. He had genuine, 6 or 7 years where he was a top flight batter. And you would have to say that he's been in the top 5 or 10 best spinners pretty much all the way through his career. And he's got the other thing about Shakib that's quite interesting, he's got a very good record at home, but it's not like absolutely brilliant. And then his bowling record away from home is very, very similar. So there's not, it's not as much of a drop off. Stokes, my big thing with Stokes, I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, but my big thing with Stokes is that if he's out of all of those we said, only him and Shakib are the specialist batters who bowl. Right, they're the only guys who probably make it automatically as specialist batters who bowl. And yet Stokes has a very similar average to Imran Khan or Jadeja. It's not like he's averaging 45.
No,
if that's the case. So I find it hard to put him in that elite thing. But having said that, how many times have we seen Stokes do things that just other players cannot do? Right.
that's true. Yeah, that's exactly why he is always in that mix or always in that conversation, because of the things he can do, not just with bat, but with ball as well. He'll come and give you that 11-over spell on a hot day in Chennai or somewhere. And even though he doesn't finish with the number of wickets or the bowling average or the 5-wicket hauls that some of those other guys did, at times he might have been more influential in where the game has gone than those guys would have. So I think that's where Stokes comes in. But I can't think of any all-rounder who more complete than Jack Callis. That's why I think he is with Gary Sobers. But for Sobers obviously before my time, and obviously Hall of Famer, the greatest ever.
So you think Callis is more complete than Imran Khan? Because I would say Imran Khan was probably more complete than him in that he had the ability to average 50 with the bat and he had the ability to average 20 with the ball, whereas Callis was never going to average 20 or 25 with the ball. Partly, and also he wasn't going to bowl a lot of overs. So from completeness, I would have thought that Keith Miller and Imran were the two most, complete all-rounders, and Shakib and Jadeja are not that far away. So I almost see Callis and Sobers as something slightly different, which is absolutely above, S-tier batting talent, but their bowling was good. But were they ever better than, let's say, the fourth best bowler, right, in a good bowling attack? And that's good skill in its own. I'm not.
It is, but again, I think that had a lot to do with the teams that Callis played in, right? If say, and this is all ifs and buts. If say Callis plays for a team which doesn't have the number of all-rounders that South Africa did during his era, or largely during for a major part of his era, I think he would have played a bigger role with the ball, because even towards the end, he never, like, his bowling never dropped, which I think really stood out for me. And there are a lot of other guys who, if you average as high as he did with the bat and score the number of runs he did with the bat, their bowling would kind of start to taper off, or they don't bowl as much as they would have at the start. But he just, I was there for his final test in Durban, he was still bowling the same way he was. Maybe he dropped a little bit in pace, but he had all the skills. He could swing the ball, he had a sharp shot delivery, he had slow ones, he took wickets across all formats. So I think his bowling was a little more underrated because of the teams he played in with,
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but he got the new ball. Like he would come on around the 8th to 12th over quite a lot, right? He wasn't getting thrown the ball in the way that Stokes is getting thrown the ball.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And he didn't have to do the grunt work that Sobers had to do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no one had to do. I mean, Sobers was bowling 37 overs a match, which is ridiculous if you're averaging over 50. But you have a look at Callis's first-class record. He averaged roughly the same in first-class cricket as he does in Test cricket. I think there's a very good argument, and you could say this for Kapil Dev. You probably say this for Stokes. You probably say this for Callis. You probably say this for Keith Miller as well. That if those guys were only good at their second skill, and they spent all their time on it, Callis is probably still a Test match quality bowler. But as I said, he's probably more the fourth bowler that you pick in that team, right? Rather than someone else. Was that Sean Pollock out of this as well, who never gets mentioned in all
exactly. Yeah.
And he was absolutely fantastic. And do you know who else's figures are really good? Because I looked him up again the other day. Is Brian McMillan, just because you mentioned all these South African all-rounders. Anyway, we're going to get off this question. Otherwise, we'll get to Aubrey Faulkner. Christopher says, when selecting openers, how much would be looked at whether batters make regular sub-10 scores and out quickly compared to maybe starts, and for where a batsman may change and see off the first change? So this is something that's come in the last couple of years, I would say. So Sean Marsh was a player that the Australian team was really, really conscious of, that he made an above average amount of single figure scores. And the other one that you could talk about is obviously the whole thing with Denley, Sibley. Who's the other one? You said it before, Burns, where they literally said, look, and this is, Joe Denley completely disagrees with this, but this is what I was told by the England camp, that they basically said, look, if you can get to 50 balls or 100 balls, that is more than enough rather than scoring runs. And I think there has been a thought process that has changed. I don't think traditionally this would have been an easy stat to really have a look at. Whereas now with ball by ball data, it's quite interesting. My favorite cricketer, of course, was always he's not an opener, but was always Marcus North, because he only ever made single figure scores or triple finger scores, which is really, really rare. But those sorts of patterns with Stats Guru and then, Cricket Viz and ball by ball data and all these different things are really easy to pick up. So I do think teams think about this a little bit more than perhaps that they used to.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally the opener's role was to see off the new ball, and like it was more about the number of balls you faced than the number of runs you scored in most cases. But this is also, again, going back to the need. It's needs based, right? With every team, how strong is your middle order? I mean, you talk of Virender Sehwag and Akash Chopra. So around Akash Chopra, you had Sehwag, Dravid, Ganguly, Lakshman, Tendulkar. So even if he just made sure that Dravid walked out to bat with the ball was 15 overs old or 20 overs old, whether he scored runs or not, his job was done. I'm not saying that was his only role in the team, that was his only job in the team. But also, if he did that and Sehwag was around, like we saw in Australia, India would be close to 80 on the board. So at times didn't matter his average or the number of runs he scored, because he'd done his job. So I think that changes. I mean, that role can still be played by someone in a team which even like England, when you said about Joe Denley and Rory Burns, they had such a strong middle order. They still do. That all you wanted was like, hey, can we just make sure Joe Root doesn't walk out to bat in the first 5 overs? That's your only job. Make sure Joe Root is in there. He can have 2 cups of tea rather than 1 cup of tea, or 0 cups of tea before he walks out to bat. If you can do that, then you can play as an opener in the team. And also depends on what options you have as well, right? I mean, at times, and especially with openers, every country goes through a phase where you just don't have enough. You don't have enough options to pick from. And then suddenly there's a glut of them. And you think of any major test cricketing nation, they've all gone through that. Like Australia right now, I mean, yes, there are options, but there's this reluctance to move on from Warner and Khawaja, because you're like, okay, is it Renshaw? Is it when will Will Pekoski be ready again? Or do you go to Cam Bancroft? But there's not enough new names that have popped up and said, oh, you know what, we sorted for this position. So I think that also has a lot to do with it. But I don't know, who will you pick, Jarrod? I'll pick someone who I'm a traditionalist in some ways. I think if we can see off the new ball, if we can just bat time, I don't know, it changes with this whole baseball theory. Of course it does. But I mean, if it's a strong middle order, if you can just do that. And there will be times when you'll get set and make a score. So it doesn't matter.
I think most of the more successful teams of all time have had an attacking opener. And I don't necessarily mean they all need to be Sehwag or Hayden, right? But having Sehwag, Hayden, Arthur Morris, whoever those sorts of players are, I think it does set a tone. But having said that, I'm not sure you can do that in New Zealand or England, right? Like, I'm not sure you can, and that's when that's kind of when you want the Dom Sibley. I mean, I'm not saying if you have a choice between Sehwag and Sibley, you pick Sibley, but there's a reason why that, I always look back to the Alex Hales experiment when he opened the batting for England and he had a slower strike rate than Alistair Cook, right? And it was basically because it's just hard to do that in red ball cricket. And, Jason Roy struggled with it as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Warner hasn't made any runs there. The entire, I've done a 17-part docuseries on the fact that New Zealand have always struggled to find openers.
Yeah.
But in the rest of the world, I do think, that sort of Gordon Greenidge type cricketer is a important person to have. That said, I may have picked out like about 6 of the 12 guys who've ever been able to do that.
Exactly.
Because you've got a lot of like Chris Srikanth and Keith Stackpole type guys who they attacked, but did they, they probably didn't average very high. I don't know if either of those guys averaged over 35 or over 40. And so it is a really tough thing. But there's a part of me that thinks that is ideal. But I really think, I've been thinking about this a lot. I just think opening in Asia is very different than everywhere else. And then again, opening in England and New Zealand is very different than everywhere else. And with that Duke's ball in West Indies, maybe that one is another one as well. Opening in South Africa and Australia is probably its own thing. There maybe isn't that many complete openers, just because the skills needed, like the skills needed to face Rabada on a lively pitch are not the same skills that are needed to face Ashwin in the second innings at Chennai, right? Like they're just not. I don't know why we both keep mentioning Chennai so much today, but we are.
Oh, exactly, yeah.
Oh, here we go. I should have found this earlier. Ram Kumar says, is Barrett Sundaresan the Rishi Dhawan of the Red Inca podcast? Bats at 9 and doesn't bowl.
I mean, it's a role I would love to have played when I was playing cricket regularly. Bat at 9 and not bowl. I did bat at 9 a lot, but I was bowling a lot as well. But
have you ever not batted and not bowled in a game?
No, I don't think so. I've always bowled. There have obviously been times when I haven't batted, quite a few times. But
you were a seamer though, weren't you?
I was, yeah.
I'm a spinner, so occasionally that would happen. Like if I was batting down the order and the quicks got all the wickets, there's they don't always throw you the ball. I remember the weirdest game I ever played was I was playing for North Melbourne, and it was the last over of the game of our innings, and I hadn't bowled, and the captain threw me the ball, and it was one of the first times I went, what? Why are you getting a leg spinner to come on for the last over? Anyway, it's good to have Barrett back for this week anyway. Now that you've all abused him, he'll disappear again. Josh says, what if I use a time machine to swap Hadley and McGrath to the other team and era? McGrath, I almost think that McGrath would have been harder to play if he bowled in the 80s.
Yeah.
Just because I think the wickets were not quite as good as maybe that's not true. I don't know. I kind of feel that was when the West Indies were completely dominated bowling back of a length, which is what McGrath would have done. I don't know if it matters what era that Hadley bowled in. By the time he gets to the 80s, he's really, really good. From a team perspective, this is my thought on this. Tell me what you think. Because they're both new ball bowlers and they were both so dominant, I don't think moving them into another team would have the same impact that moving Shane Warne into a less successful team, or Anil Kumble into a less successful team, or Murali into if you put Murali into a team that had McGrath and Gillespie, for instance, I would have thought that would have given Murali a huge advantage. He doesn't have to work over set batters as much. But I'm not sure if Hadley and McGrath make as big of a difference. Although, obviously, who's Hadley's best bowling partner?
Chatfield, I guess.
Chatfield, Morrison, Cairns. I mean, that's a big difference from Gillespie, Fleming, Lee, who else? Merv. Rifle.
Rifle, even McDermott early on. Yeah.
Would Paul Rifle have been better than any of those New Zealand seamers?
I think so.
And he's the seventh best bowler that McGrath probably bowls with?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And again, I think Paul Rifle is quite underrated.
He was a fantastic bowler, but I'm saying if you compare him to the second best.
Absolutely.
I mean, maybe averages are different and everything else. Maybe we're forgetting someone. And Ewan Chatfield was a really good bowler, and Cairns and Morrison certainly had their moments. But Hadley never had to bowl with anyone who was consistently a threat home and away the way that. I mean, not only did McGrath have one of the greatest spinners of all time, he just had a lot of spin bowling options. The only thing Hadley probably has, although I'm struggling to think about it, but I would say there's probably maybe more 5-man attacks that he might have bowled in. But he bowled probably a third of the overs anyway, so it maybe didn't matter.
With Hadley, I think what really stood out was his record in Asia. I mean, he took a lot of wickets in India for sure. I think he did so rather in Pakistan as well. I think more than you're right. I mean, you swap them, they both fit in, regardless of what era they played in. But I think it would have it's a great question from Josh, because it would have been fascinating to see Glenn McGrath bowl in the 80s, because at a time when it was the last era where batters had the patience to not feel for the ball as much as, like, through the 90s and then into the 2000s, because there was so much more white ball cricket as well. Naturally, a lot of batters were going towards the ball, and I think the McGrath and a lot of bowlers in the 90s and even today benefit from that, as compared to cricket in the 70s and the 80s, when, especially just speaking about openers, I think openers had a lot more patience. There were a lot more balls being left alone. So to see McGrath work over batters in that era would have been fascinating. I mean, you can imagine so many matchups, right? And there's the first mention of wrestling, and it's called. I mean, it happens in wrestling all the time. You always like fantasy book, like, what would it have been to see Hulk Hogan at his peak against I don't know, Goldberg at his peak, or John Cena at his peak, or something like that. So Glenn McGrath bowling, taking the new ball with, say, Chatfield and Morrison against Haynes and Greenwich and Viv Richards at their peak. It would have been fascinating to see. But I think Hadley and for Hadley, I mean, to have batters walk down at him, maybe potentially,
that's
like, using their feet, trying to hit him off his length.
Hadley also would have got that boom. I reckon Hadley would have worked out quicker the LBW than modern fast bowlers did. And he bowled a lot fuller naturally anyway, which would have helped with DRS. And he bowled very, very stump to stump. So it's possible he might have got a small bump of that, although it's probably only the last 3 or 4 years of McGrath's career anyway. But we know that, Kevin Peterson started to use the crease to McGrath a little bit more. The other thing is, I always remember that McGrath would get frustrated when players were leaving him a lot. Right now, as you said, he grew up in an era where that doesn't happen. So, of course, when they start to leave him a little bit more, that maybe frustrates him. How he would have gone, though, because I don't think he was a particularly... I mean, my memory is, and he's kind of pre-Hawkeye for a lot of his career, but my memory is he bowled a shorter line than most other bowlers did.
For sure.
That West Indian line and length, I should say, not just line, but also wide of off stump. And so it was easier to leave than perhaps other people. But no, it's fascinating. So I was just trying to think of other bowlers if you sort of swap them in different eras. Joel Garner would be a very interesting person if you took him away from... If you put him in somewhere like, well, obviously Asia would be interesting, but if he was bowling in Australia, he'd get the extra bounce. But first change bowlers in Australia are usually a huge disadvantage, because once that new ball, dies a little bit, they struggle. So there are bowlers who, I'm not saying that they wouldn't evolve, and they might not. I mean, Joel Garner was pretty good in first class cricket in Australia, and pretty good in Test cricket in Australia. I think he would have worked it out. But there are bowlers who would probably have to change quite a bit. Like, we know that if Jimmy Anderson was a South African bowler, he probably would have kept his pace a lot longer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's the kind of conditions you get to bowl in for longer periods as well. I mean, our Ashwin would be fascinating. I mean, with his skill set and his ability to experiment and always be open to experiment. Imagine if he played a lot of his cricket in Australia, and Nathan Lyon was playing for India. I mean, it's again, maybe that should happen. Maybe cricket will reach a point. I mean, now it's too late with all this league cricket, but maybe cricket would reach a point where, just for funsies, you get to swap, like a partner swap thing with.
And now it's a really interesting one going ahead, because I've got a piece about trades and what trades you could make in cricket. Let's take a break here on a Wagon Wheel, and we'll come back. We've got a few more questions for Patreon, and then we'll go to the chat section, comment section as well.
Our next partner is Athletic Greens. If cricket has taught us anything, it's that green things are good for you. I take AG1 by Athletic Greens every day. I gave AG1 a try because a while back I was stuck in a studio reporting on New Zealand, England on overnights. When those games weren't on, I was up early watching India, Australia at around 4 a.m. In between afternoon naps, I had to watch the Women's World Cup. And when all that was finished, I was doing early mornings for Bangladesh, England. Ignoring the fact that there's too much cricket, that's a stupid schedule for a human being as well. And so Athletic Greens was a far better alternative to ice baths. And after taking it, I felt a lot better. In fact, the whole thing probably kept me sane and healthy at the same time. And also being the kind of nutritional drink I needed to survive those hours, and also the 2 a.m. biltong binges I did a few times. Look, I am not going to pretend I have a balanced diet, so Athletic Greens is how I cover the nutritional basis. 1 small scoop of AG1 with water, and I drink it first thing in the morning each day. Done. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then Athletics Greens is giving you a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and also 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/Inca. That's the Inca from the end of my Red Inca podcast. So athleticgreens.com/Inca. Check it out now because it is the best screen top you'll ever invest in.
All right, welcome back, and we've got Barrett with us on his Wagon Wheel debut. He's just nailing these questions. Although, as I try to move on, of course, he comes up with 10 more points. I now realize that I would have to limit the amount of questions for Barrett. But Josh says, hypothetical, the 9 test teams decide, aren't there more than 9? But anyway, okay. The 9 test teams decide to put all their players up for an NBA-style draft for the World Test Championship. Who would you pick first? Jadeja, Ashwin, Blundell is on that list, Josh. I've already done a video on this. I think Jadeja is your first choice. And it's weird because it feels like it's not that long ago that he wasn't even an automatic selection in India's team or in all conditions. But for me, the ability to bat, let's say 5, but probably number 6 and make runs while also being one of the world's best bowlers, it completely transforms your team. I think Ashwin's incredible. Obviously, you could throw Rabada and Cummins up there. Labuschagne, Smith, Babar Azam. There's a lot of good cricketers. Stokes, Holder, I suppose, as well. Yeah. But I just think Jadeja, for me, is the automatic choice because you have one of the world's best spinners and you have a frontline batter and you have a brilliant fielder.
And wasn't it Paul Fabres, when he was assistant coach of England, who said, I think he was asked, not a similar question, but he was asked, I don't remember who told me this, or maybe I heard it on commentary, but this is not even now. When was Paul Fabres the assistant coach? 2018?
A few years ago now, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe 17, 18, somebody asked him, so if there's one international cricketer out there who you would want to play in this English team, who would it be? And without even having to think about it, he said Ravindra Jadeja. And this is when he hadn't hit his peak as a batter at test level. So, yeah, I mean, it just brings so much to the table, right? I mean, the fielding, the batting, the ever-improving batting, I should say, the bowling. It was interesting watching Jadeja, to digress slightly, as a batter in the Australia tour of India, because he was batting number 5, but there were times when I thought he was off rhythm. Like, he was batting too much like a number 5, if that makes sense. Like a Jadeja who's doing well is someone who's like scoring consistently and is always looking to score runs. But I think the pitches didn't help either in the first 2-3 tests. So sorry about that. So I think that kind of played a role in it as well. But yeah, I think Jadeja is just he's got everything, and he's the right age as well. I mean, he's 32 now. Like, so
wow, I was going to throw this at you because we've done that without thinking of players' ages.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
if you factor in ages, I'm not sure this question is anywhere near as easy. Cameron Green might be the player.
That's exactly who I was thinking of.
Just
Cameron Green is,
yeah. I'm trying to think if they're, I mean, I can't think of anyone else obvious in, world cricket. Obviously, you got Labuschagne's quite young as well. Babar Azam's 28, so you probably don't pick someone 28. You probably want someone a little bit. Shaheen Afridi, I don't know what age he is. Written down 24, or in real life.
Yeah, 24, 25.
Yeah, so he's another one that is probably, but because of his injury concerns, maybe you don't take him number 1. Marco Janssen is another interesting one.
Yes, yeah.
As well. That wouldn't be far away. But yeah, it's probably something we should try and do one day is like the top 25 players under 25 in international cricket is a really, really interesting one at the moment, and where you would have all those different players. But yeah, I think if it's, without doing any research off the top of my head, if we're factoring in age, I think Cameron Green is probably fairly high up on that. It just tells you how much all-rounders are valued as much as anything else. Not if it was a T20 team, though. Not at the moment.
Not at the moment, yeah.
That's a story for another day. Patrick says, who would you call the best opener in the world right now?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Best opener in the
Khawaja
world.
might have the best stats over the last couple of years.
He would. And now that he's got
Karuna
runs
Ratna.
in, Karunaratne just keeps making hundreds, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So,
Elgar was up there for a long time, even when, and then he just sort of dropped off a cliff the last couple of years. This is how bad it is, and I'm not slagging him off, but Brathwaite is in the conversation.
He is.
And he's not obviously the best, but he's in the conversation, and I think that shows you that it's been bad. Latham was up there for a long time.
He was,
Not quite at that level anymore. Am I missing anyone else?
Devin Conway, does he bat number 3? Does he open these days? So
he was opening, wasn't he? I mean, I suppose, I feel like he hasn't played enough, but maybe he has. I mean, he's got a good record, so maybe he's up there already.
Yeah, but considering Patrick doesn't mention which format, is he asking us to pick an opener who fits in across formats? Is there anyone out there? Rohit Sharma, I guess. But
we didn't even mention Rohit. He certainly has to be up there. Yeah,
he has to be up there. I mean, how many guys are in men's international cricket right now who open across all formats? There's Rohit.
Yeah.
KL Rahul at times, like even though he gets criticized.
Plays one-day cricket, doesn't he? But not T20. He bats in the middle order in T20.
Yeah, he does. I think he plays more as or even
Ratney is his T20 career is happily over.
They made him captain for the 2019 World Cup, remember, randomly, and then it didn't work out too well. There are
I only remember because of that photo they all took. Do you remember when they were in a warehouse?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Great question, Patrick. Thanks for that. Aditya says, if Afghanistan had the chance to play the same number of tests as the major nations, where do you have Rashid Khan ending up as a test spinner? Would he have ended up in the top tier? I think if he played a lot of test cricket, he would be fantastic. I think he's a really good first-class bowler. Remember when he took 11 wickets against England Lions before he'd even really developed as a bowler. He might have, he was the champion in T20 cricket. I think that Sunil Narine would have been a very good test bowler as well, and I think Rashid Khan would be massively better than him as a test bowler.
Yeah, for sure.
So if they were playing, I don't know. I think he would be the best leg spinner since Warne, Warne and Kumble, with obvious. Yasir Shah's weird-ass career now, where he was brilliant for a couple of years and then dropped off. But I think he had the ability to be better than Yasir Shah. Am I missing any other leg spinners? I don't think I am I?
No, I mean, but my question is, where will Rashid Khan find time to play test cricket, even if Afghanistan were to start playing a lot of test matches, considering he just seems to be going from one league to another, and understandably so. I mean, he's such a rare talent that everybody wants him playing in their league. So that'll be, I mean, this is of course a hypothetical question.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter. He doesn't have to make that decision anyway, right? Because they're never going to play enough tests.
Matches. That's true. But I'll tell you this. I was thinking about it the other day, and I'm sure you've done a video on this at some point. I mean, he'll end up with Tendulkar-esque numbers with the ball in T20 cricket, right? With numbers that nobody will be able to reach for a long, long time. The rate at which he's going, and again, with ages and whatever, he's in early 20s now, apparently, like 24, 23.
I mean,
whatever his age is.
Let's say he is that.
Yeah. Let's say he's 24. I think that's his official age.
I did a big research on him recently, and I don't know if I ended up writing the piece. I think I was going to do it for someone else, not myself. But I've got acres and acres of research. I couldn't work out exactly what country he was born in, whether it was Pakistan or Afghanistan. And I couldn't work out exactly where he spent his younger years. It felt like he spent them in both countries.
Yeah,
he did. He was going between the both. It would be very hard for them to know his exact age or anything like that. He would have, from what my knowledge of that area, he would have gone into class based on what his reading skill was, what his math skill was, rather than what his age was, probably more often than not. And so it's possible that no one knows his real age. It's not even. There's a lot of age fraud, obviously, in underage cricket at times, but I don't think this is particularly a case of that. I think it's more a case of the old-fashioned sort of thing where there was a war on in his country. His family sort of lived halfway between both countries. They were crossing the Hindu Kush mountains over and over again for work and everything else. So, but let's say at worst he's 27.
Yeah.
Right. He's a leg spinner, and he's got himself very fit. He wasn't always fit when he started.
No.
You know, the one thing I would say is because of the pace that he bowls and the revolution he gets on the ball, eventually that's going to have to wear out finger, wrist, elbow, shoulder, whichever one goes first.
Yeah. That's going to be the big challenge for him. So he's especially the shoulder. I don't know. I mean, we'll see how it works out. And again, that leads us back to Aditya's question. Would his shoulder, the rest of it hold up if he were to play a lot of test matches, right? When he regularly has to bowl. And think about it. I mean, the way the Afghanistan team is set up, they have so many spinners who keep coming through the ranks. But still, you would think Rashid Khan will bowl the majority of the overs, like he has the few times they have played Test cricket. And what the wear and tear that'll have on his bowling as well. So you would end up in the top tier. Sunil Narayan was a disappointment, but he played Test cricket when the controversy or the speculation around his action was at his peak. So I think that impacted his cricket a lot. I don't think he got to play a lot of home tests. The brief period where he was playing Test cricket, I think that kind of hindered his Test career as well.
Look, his numbers are bad, but if you watched him bowl in Test cricket, there were certain times when you understood it. And
yes,
I would, if you disregard T20 cricket, if you watched him bowl when he was young coming through, he had a brilliant off-spinning delivery.
He did.
And over the years, he hasn't needed that as much, and so it's faded away. And basically what you need is a great stock ball. And I think that's the thing. If you compare them to Ajinkya Mendes, right? Ajinkya Mendes had no great stock ball, right? And so in Test cricket, he was quite easy to play once you could understand what he was doing a little bit. Whereas with those two, Rashid Khan is bowling on an angle in at the stumps, spinning it to the top of the stumps at speed with wrongness that you're not going to be able to pick. Sunil Narayan was spinning the off spinner very well and had the ability to take the ball the other way. I just think that they probably had a better thing. But you're right with Rashid. If he bowled that many overs, I don't know how it would all last for him.
The one thing, though, I would say, last point on Rashid Khan, before we move questions,
I haven't moved questions.
is if he does end up playing a lot of Test cricket, or say if he did end up playing a lot of Test cricket, I think it would make him an even more potent T20 bowler, because he'll learn more skills of getting batters out, where even when batters are trying to play him out, I think he'll figure out ways of getting them out. So it'll just make him a more complete bowler, and I think that's the and imagine what a force he would be then in T20 cricket if he becomes even more consistent at taking wickets than he is now.
No, I think you're right. And I think that's why people learned to block out Sunil Narayan, because he didn't develop those other skills. Jake says, do you think IPL owners at some sports start to build their own stadiums similar to what other sports do? This is a really good question. I remember when it came through. My feeling is yes, because I do think there is some friction at times between stadiums. So for those who don't know, Eden Gardens is run by the police. And I can tell you that KKR and IMG and the BCCI are not always completely happy with how the police run that particular stadium, as brilliant as, well, I say as brilliant as it is, but as romantic as that stadium is. My memory of working with the IPL, and you might know a little bit more about this, but my memory of the IPL is they were always really happy when games were in Wankhede, because IMG basically ran Wankhede.
Yeah,
they could do exactly what they wanted there. Bengaluru is definitely not the case. I'm assuming Delhi would not be the case. I'm assuming there's a few grounds out there where you would have to deal with the old men in blazers. And so that would affect them. So yes, I could understand this, but I could be wrong. It feels like Indian cricket's way off from the owners thinking they need to do this.
No, I mean, at the moment, the owners are more focused on buying teams elsewhere and making sure that their brand is remains a 12-month product. I think they would have stretched it up to 6 to 8 months at this point, I guess, with all the leagues coming up. But I'm sure they want a couple more leagues going on so that it's a 12-month product. And it helps that now there's the Women's Premier League as well, which allows them to do that and, just add to their product. But yeah, you're right. I mean, what happens to answer Jake's second part of the question is that's exactly how it happens. I mean, at the Wankhede, the MCA obviously the BCCI and the MCA, they own the stadium, or they run the affairs of the Wankhede. But I think a week out from the IPL starting is when the keys are kind of handed over to the to Reliance, to the Ambanis, and then they take over. The best example of that is when India won the 2011 World Cup. So the evening after the final, I and one of my former colleagues went to the Wankhede. We wanted to do like this romantic piece of, this the day after India won their first ever World Cup on home soil, and we walked in, and there was a lot of work going on. So all the ICC sponsors, everything was being brought down, and this is early IPL 2011, so the fourth season. Then all the Mumbai Indians boards and everything was going up, and it felt very surreal. They were like, "Wait, can't we wait for one day? Like, it's been less than like 20 hours since Dhoni hit that six. Can't we wait?" But they couldn't wait because the IPL was just around the corner, and they were so busy doing all of this. I just like happily walked into the Indian dressing room, and what was the Indian dressing room, and nobody was there to stop us. And so my colleague and I actually sat where Gary Kirsten and those guys were sitting in the dugout, just to get a feel of what it must have been like. And this is all happening like, it must have been like 5 p.m. the next day. So less than 18 hours after, like, Dhoni had happened. So
Do you know what I love about that is that he's hit a six. It's changed Indian cricket culture forever and all this sort of stuff. And there's still someone at the same ground less than 24 hours later putting up a massive picture of Aiden Blizzard.
That's true, actually. That is exactly what
he had a
happening.
50-foot picture on that ground.
He did.
I've got a selfie of me with the massive Aiden Blizzard thing. And like, if you're listening to this podcast and you're not from Australia and you remember who Aiden Blizzard is, congratulations to you.
Congratulations, indeed. Yeah. I think he works in cricket administration now. I have bumped into him a few times. He does. I think I'm going to say in Canberra, but I've definitely bumped into him in the last few years. Yeah.
Don't know how we got onto that. Oh, we got a big one here from Cam. He's increasingly nostalgic about the excitement of the first test of the Australian summer. Prior to 2001, it would have been months since seeing the Australian team play, aside from a brief snippet on the news and overseas. The build-up to seeing the team play again was great and such a celebration. Now we're saturated by cricket, and even if it's not the national teams playing, we're still watching the same players all year long in franchise leagues. Am I just getting old? I'm not even 40. Help. One thing I would say is, he's right, obviously, and I think this is the case for pretty much, well, certainly anyone who watched cricket before 1992, but even before the year 2000, as he says. Had this, because we didn't see as much of overseas tours. We didn't see neutral teams really at all in those days or anything. The one thing I would say is, I don't know if this is more for hardcore cricket people. If you're a hardcore cricket fan, you're watching all this stuff.
Yeah.
If you're a casual fan, you're probably not actually watching as much. So the first... and I'm basing this on people I know in England who don't follow the English team, but will follow, the first test of the summer. They still have that buzz, but for the rest of us, it's a little bit different. Certainly for me and Barrett, it's a little bit different. But even for other people, I can understand why it's a little bit different. But yeah, I think it's changed, Cam. But you also have other things that have been, have developed at that time, I would suggest.
And now that I've lived in Australia for a few years, it's so seasonal as well, right? And it's also, and Jarrod, you can correct me if I'm wrong. This is my observation. It is, everything is a tradition in Australia, right? I mean, whether it's
instantly
what you do on the morning of Anzac Day, or how you celebrate any other day, or even like, religious festivals like Easter or Christmas, or the AFL Grand Final, whether you are interested in it or not, you will like kind of go and watch it. By the way, the gather round was fantastic. Isha and I
was in Adelaide. It wasn't that great, and that's the reason I couldn't see the Magpies play when I came back. No, you wrote about the tradition. So I came back to Australia for 3 weeks, obviously.
Yeah.
I think about 4 days into my trip, it was Good Friday, right?
Yeah.
Good Friday in Melbourne is a telethon for the Royal Children's Hospital, where Bryden Coverdale, the great Bryden Coverdale,
of course, the great Bryden, Sir Bryden Coverdale, yeah,
and has to accept phone calls from random strangers. 2 days later was the stall gift, right? So you've got this weird professional running race on grass with handicaps, right? They're both traditional. A week before that was Moomba. Right,
yes,
a week after I left is the Anzac Day football game between and people talk about that being a traditional game. Like, I'm 43 and I was about 14 or 15 when the first one was played. Right, the baggy green, this huge tradition. Well, they actually used to wear. People used to just hand them out on street
exactly.
corners, right? And Australia Day as a celebration. When I grew up, there was no celebration for Australia Day. I don't remember anything happening. Some states were a little bit different, but certainly in Melbourne, it wasn't a massive thing. Things become sort of instant traditions in Australia. And I think you're right. I think the first day of the Australian summer is probably one of those, right? As is the Australia Day stuff in Adelaide, the New Year's stuff, the Boxing Day, all those sorts of things became traditions. But I don't know how many people know this, but Boxing Day Test doesn't become regular until 87 or 88.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there were Shield games. Victoria used to play New South Wales sometimes on Boxing Day. I think Victoria played West Indies at one stage on Boxing Day. Like, it wasn't even always a massive game.
I think it was a little before that. I remember doing some research on this. Maybe the late 70s is like, or just after the Packer Revolution is when Boxing Day Test become a thing.
I think it goes back until the late 1800s when they existed. But you're right, they're not anywhere near consistent, and they disappear for the big periods, and then they come back. I think there's one missing in the 80s. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm misremembering, but I think there's one year even missing in the 80s. So it really is a slow burn before it comes on. And then it's that instant tradition of almost within 6 years of it being every year. It's we've always celebrated this. Like all those people were going to watch Victoria, New South Wales play or whatever other game.
Yeah.
So there you go. So don't worry, Cam. If you're in Australia, you and Barrett will certainly find other traditions. Like the gather round.
Which will stay in Adelaide for 3 more years. Yes.
Yeah, it will only make sense to footy fans. James says, has there been any discussion inside cricket about Herbalife sponsorship at the IPL? From the UK, it's very surprising to see it, but I haven't seen anyone really talking about this. Do you know what Herbalife is?
I've seen it as a sponsor in the IPL, but I'm not really in tune with what Herbalife is. Is it something to do with therapy or something like that?
I wonder if it is a pyramid scheme, nutritional. So I've just Googled up, and I just put Herbalife pyramid, and straight away, just because I saw the words global marketing structure, and I was like, that just sounds like a pyramid scheme. So James, I think it's fair to say that me and Barra had no idea what Herbalife was until my latest Google, having a look at it there. It does seem like an odd sponsor, but it's interesting, James, that you're having a look at this. Have a look at how many cricket teams around the world have had cryptocurrencies on the front of their shirts, and have a look at how many of those cryptocurrencies are still keeping any of their values. Have a look at the cricketers, and not just the cricketers, but also I'd love to have a look at the ICC Cricktoss, if you remember, which I believe is pronounced Cricktos, but looks like Cricktoss when it's written down. There's no way that those are keeping value. It's a real shame I didn't buy my for $6. I could have got a Tamal Mills dot ball, but I never ended up buying that. So I think there's a few things in cricket that, when it comes to sponsorship, are a little bit, not right. But I kind of always feel this is how sports. If you go back and you watch old sports sponsorship, that's kind of what it is, right? Like it's always something that is about to be banned by a government or something along those lines. Don't you think?
Oh, I mean, I watched a few IPL games this time, and Herbalife, by the way, are sponsoring the Active Catch of the Week. So every game, some player wins the Herbalife Active Catch of the Match award. So
good on them.
That's what they're sponsoring. But yeah, I mean, even watching the Visit Saudi ads. I don't know if you watched any IPL this year, Jarrod, or if they pop up. So it they must be a major sponsor, because during every game that I've seen, it's not something that just pops up. It's not a Visit Saudi, I don't know, save of the day, but it pops up on the big screen. So it's generally when they're coming out of a strategy break, and then whoever the commentator is has to talk about, visit the great sites of Saudi, Jeddah, and which is kind of going back to advertising in cricket. At a time, there's so much controversy about Saudi Arabia investing in any kind of sport, like which included WWE, by the way, just a while back. You have the IPL going on, and this massive Visit Saudi thing, which
Well,
pops
you
up
can
on the
see
big
them all
screen.
over the ground. They're all over the
Yeah, they're
on the
everywhere.
boards,
I mean,
aren't they?
they're
Yeah.
like one of. So yeah, I mean, it's gonna be interesting where cricket's headed or sport is headed next with in terms of marketing. And there's always controversy about in Australia about gambling companies and sport and
Fast food companies,
Yeah, true.
KFC and the Big Bash, and then the potato crisps in for the 100, right? Like that's what I mean. It's always something that feels like it's on the edge of getting banned, whether it's or whatever that may be. So that's kind of how sport goes, and I think cricket has followed that very much. But
Benson and Hedges cigarettes, don't forget.
It was hilarious to see how many cigarette companies have how many tournaments were sponsored by various cigarettes.
That's true, actually.
John Player was cigarettes, weren't they?
Yeah, and the
John Player League.
Will's World Cup as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Talking of Will says, would you rather have a low order that can all bat, but that starts at number 6, or high level batters all the way to number 7, but 4 bowlers that all ought to be number 11s? So if your lower order, the tricky bit about this question for me is I don't know if the lower order, if they can all bat, does that mean that they are not all specialist bowlers? Because I want 4 specialist bowlers guaranteed in any test match. And if I don't have that, I would feel much more nervous about that than I ever would about having 4 number 11s.
And also, how good are those 4 bowlers who can't bat? Well, that also makes a big difference as well. Like, I mean, if they all average in the mid-30s with the ball and can't bat, then you're on shaky ground, right? So I think that has a lot to do with it. And if you remember back in the day when you would have associate nations come and play in these ICC tournaments, a lot of them would be like that. I remember even a good team like Kenya from 1996. The lower order was not the best, but they had enough of bowlers. I mean, enough bowling in there to do decently enough to get a couple of wins here and there. But you would see that. I mean, suddenly you'd get into the lower order and they would get blown away. I think to an extent, Australia had that issue in the tests now. I mean, Pat Cummins had one score in Delhi, but it was once India got to that middle order or got past, the lower order at one point was averaging 8 or 7 the last 4 batters. So that didn't help. I remember India in 2018-19 going to Perth and picking 4 fast bowlers, all of whom were not really good with the bat, and that really exposed the tail. So I think in modern day cricket, you do need at least your number 8 to average in the mid-20s or early 20s. Otherwise, it is a challenge, because most other teams will have someone at 8 and 9 averaging in the 20s. That's where world cricket has gone.
I think it matters now. I think between 2000 and 2015, when top order batters are all averaging over 40, it probably didn't matter as much. Whereas at the moment, with the new ball dominating and with teams struggling, you do need someone to chip in. Akshar Patel is a perfect example of that. All right, quick break here. And then afterwards, we will come back and we'll get rid of any super chats that you have. You're listening to Uncover with Jarrod Kimber and Barrett Sundaresan. If you like what we are making here and you want to know if you can help out, well, you can. On top of asking super chats on our lives, you can also support us through Patreon or buy me a coffee. The more support we can get, the better and more videos we can make. On Patreon, there are plenty of other things we offer too, like a Discord server, the chance to ask questions directly, AMAs, and early versions of our recordings. This channel only exists because people like you help support it. We have to buy equipment, software, pay wages, and my mortgage, I suppose, just to make this stuff happen. And if you don't have any money available to spend, it isn't just your money we want. Shares, likes, retweets, comments, subscriptions, the little bell icon thing, all of it. They help us build and become more professional, make more videos, better videos, all that sort of stuff. So thank you for watching everything we make and for all your support so far. All right, welcome back. Oh, I've still got that picture up. I thought I was being professional, and then now I've got to press something else as well. They've taught me all this stuff. Here we go. I think that's right. No, wait. Is that the right one? Yeah, I'll do that. just a couple of quick ones because Barrett and I go on, and together we go on, and there was a lot of questions today. But first question from the audience is just Aditya appreciating your gorgeous hair.
Yeah, Aditya seems to have gorgeous hair as well, from what I can see.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. That might be a proposal. And Pratik says, is Jarrod a better batter or bowler? So I was a better bowler. And then I think when I moved to the UK, I think my batting maybe caught up to my bowling. And now, of course, that I've broken my arm in several places, I may never be able to bowl leg spin again. So I'd be surprised if I could be a good bowler ever again. So I suppose late in life, I've changed. But yeah, no, I had a bit of a resurgence with my bat. I just like slogging. And it got to a point where eventually I was like, maybe I'll try batting as well. I'll chip them around. But there you go. But we have real questions, not just about hair and my technique. Super chat from Sydney, who says, if the advantage to batting first is magnified by the fact that more tests get results, would switching to 4-day tests bring them back into balance?
But is it getting magnified though? I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not on top of the stats when it comes to teams winning, or at least there being more results based on that. You're the master of this, Jarrod. But
I haven't looked at that. I don't think. I mean, we've started to see teams like England decide to bowl second. So I would have thought that they would be the least likely. Sorry, not bowl second, bat second. I think they would be the least likely to go against the data from that perspective. But if that's the case, yeah, I think what 4-day tests are going to be really interesting. We'll lose about 50 overs.
Yeah.
Overall, we won't lose all the overs of the extra day because they will fit extras in.
Obviously.
But what I would say is that there will be I think there'll be more of a first class vibe. So we will see more artificial games. We'll see people more playing for results, especially if the World Test Championship is still going. I would have thought that is the thing that we are more likely to see in 4-day tests. However, if they are 4-day tests and they are day-night, and we have pink balls, we probably only need a day and a half for some of them.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I'm all for like keeping it to 5 days and giving it a go. I mean, if a lot of test matches, like, because that's the most recent tour test series I covered, and that's how far my memory goes these days. The first 3 tests are over in 3 days, 3 days, and 2 days, and then you have the Ahmedabad test, which goes on. I mean, maybe it should have been culled on day 4. It was going nowhere, but it's good to have one test. I've always said test matches should be played over 5 days, but finish in 4 days. So you have the 5th day to do your laundry. That's how I've always looked at it. So
sounds like someone who wants a day off rather than anything to do with cricket. But that wouldn't be us. Abhinav says, how is cricket commentary going to evolve in the future? Where are things heading? Same as now. Well, I think we've already seen the first step, which is having the multiple streams where it's Star. Is it Star or Sony? I always get confused. But they've.
Star has the TV rights and Geo has the digital rights.
Yes. But who was it who had the thing with Dean Jones and Scott Styris?
Oh, that was Star. I mean, they had the dugout, which was a good concept.
Yeah, I think that's the first one. Also, multiple languages is the other one.
Right now in India, I mean, you have what? I think 12 or 14 languages. And languages you wouldn't have thought of for cricket broadcasting, like Bhojpuri is doing really well. And I think what's going to happen is, for a long period, for the last 15, 20 years, around the world, but especially in the subcontinent, the easiest way to get into a commentary box was if you were a former first-class cricketer, or definitely if you were a former test cricketer. I think by easy, I don't want to undermine what they're doing, but you had an in, right? Like, it was obviously easier for you to get in as compared to, say, one of us who hasn't played first-class cricket, for example. But I think that will change right now, and I think.
Why do you think that will change? Because I don't see that changing at all.
No, it is changing with the IPL, because again, going back to it being broadcast in many languages.
The languages thing. Yeah, no.
Yeah, so when you're catering to different regions of the country. And I was reading this really interesting interview. I'll send it to you. That Sanjog Gupta has given, the boss of Star, as given to Economic Times, where he talks about that. Like they've tapped into parts of India which weren't really into watching the IPL on TV by using local actors or like big non-cricketing celebrities in the area, throw them into the commentary box where people are like, "Oh wow, like this is someone because the fandom for cinema or for films is different in different parts of India.
Yeah.
In the south, it's a proper obsession, right? Whether it's Rajnikant or whoever, not just Rajnikant is obviously above everyone else, but even the more modern day actors. Like I know young people who a friend's cousin or someone who came and stayed with us once in Bombay. Like he was like maybe early 20s at that point. He was so obsessed with this one particular Telugu actor that he knew everything about him, Jarrod. So if he did something, this guy would watch it. So I think there are so many different ways of tapping into the audiences, even in a country like India where you just expect everyone to be a cricket fan. So I think that's going to change over time. I think we're going to have a lot of non-cricket people come into commentary, but that's to do with the IPL. But I think with Test cricket,
I don't know if you know this, but New Zealand recently had their first Maori broadcast as well.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I did.
Obviously,
I did
the South Africans, did they do it in 4 languages?
Yeah, I mean, and they seem to add I think they didn't have Xhosa to start with. I think they added it in the last few years. I've seen some clips on social media or people I know posting about it. So yeah, that's going to increase a lot, I think.
So I think that's one side of it. The other side is we will see more stats heavy kinds of commentary because of fantasy cricketers and betting cricketers and people like me.
That's going to be. So I think what you see on Sky as a third man, we could well see it happens in footy, right? I've always seen it. I mean, not a live commentary, but during every break, they'll take a break from the studio and there'll be a guy talking about I don't know, bets and what's happening with the sports betting bit. But another thing that is happening on Star, I don't know whether you've seen it, is it's not still yet on live commentary, but they're using holograms of Steve Smith and Paul Collingwood. And the clip that was doing the round of poor Steve Smith looking like he's being held hostage and forced to speak on camera. So that I nobody knew what that was, but I just found out recently. Obviously, we don't get Star here, but they have 4 or 5 guys like that: Paul Collingwood, Callis, Steve Smith. So while they're doing a pre-match show in the studio, there are holograms of Steve Smith, which is kind of freaky, but I think virtual commentary is going to become a thing as well. I mean, it would also. I wouldn't be surprised if we reach a point where suddenly they have Richie Beno commentating on a T20 game, not Richie Beno or someone mimicking him, but
you can already, and I don't know if you can do it with someone who's passed, but you can certainly already scan your voice. And have your voice actually AI'd into stuff, right? So so it's not completely beyond the pale to see random things like that perhaps going ahead. But I think those are the major things that are coming up on board. But I think the other thing that I hope happens is that we have more professionalism in commentary so that the commentary teams can actually start to. I think too much in cricket, commentary teams don't really think of it as a profession.
Yes.
It's thought of as an extra job, a supplementary thing. And just simple things like having meetings with the captain and the coach the day before the game and all those sorts of things that are very, very important. Extra research. And there are some very good researchers who already work for some commentary teams, but it's not part of the whole professional package. I mean, you and I both know this. People sort of a very, very well-known cricketer, when he first started doing commentary, turned to me and sort of said, "This is easy. I can do this forever." And I was like, "Well, if it's easy, you're probably not doing it right. Like, you should probably be doing more work than just sitting down and saying something for 20 minutes and then going to get the sausage rolls from out the back of the press box." So, I think that's the big thing for me is that professional nature. And maybe you're right. Maybe with the languages, we'll see a swing back towards non-cricketers. I think cricket broadcasts were at their best when there was a combination of cricketers and non-cricketers.
Yes.
And look, it's a tough thing for you and I to say because we're both broadcasters and commentators, and so it sounds like we're talking for ourselves.
Yeah, of course.
Although in your case, you probably will end up on TV, and in my case, they would never allow it. But you know, and I'm just talking purely sex appeal here. But
of course, yeah.
But I do think that there is an element there of the way that things are going that I think audiences are getting more and more upset with the cliched commentary that sometimes comes across.
Yes.
But yeah, anyway, Barrett, I will let you go and see to your dogs and everything else. Thank you very much for coming on Wagon Wheel. Maybe next week you can actually come onto the podcast you're supposed to be on, but no hurry,
true.
you know, just in your own time, whatever you're doing.
I have a new setup now, so everything is set up. So hopefully that means I should be back. I can see another super chat. Are we supposed to take? Is this my job? I don't know.
It's not, but I have gone away. Wait, who's the last one? Reg
Jake
says, in the modern era, has there ever been a player so influential and yet so distant from the status of a legend than Ajanta Mendes? Paul Adams is probably another very, very interesting one. What about Vinod Kambli?
Oh, Vinod Kambli is a great one. Yeah, I think. But
Adrian Barrett?
Oh, my mate. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean,
There's
Adrian.
A few interesting ones, don't you think?
I think with Paul Adams and Kambli, because they still had pretty lengthy international careers in terms of what Vinod Kambli makes his debut in 91, 92 or 92 one-day cricket, and then he played till 2000. So that's a pretty longish career.
No, you're right.
Yeah, Paul Adams as well. I think 95 he makes.
But the question here is more, and then influential.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So good sense.
So like you wouldn't put Saqlain Mushtaq in there because he's close to a legend status. He's probably not a legend, but he's close to a legend status, and he had a lot to do with it.
Yeah. Irfan Pathan is another one. I mean, Irfan Pathan briefly, like for those 3-4 years, was like, you know, he had a huge influence on Indian cricket. I mean,
when he was all-rounder batting as well, like
he did. He did everything. Like I mean, in that shortish Test career, he swing bowler. He took test hat tricks. He opened. He made a Test 100. He did it all. So I think Irfan Pathan.
The influential thing's interesting as well because I would say that I almost said Inverarity. I don't mean Inverarity, do I? I mean Gleason. And the guy before Gleason. Jack Iverson's the name I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So Jack Iverson's really interesting. So he's a legitimate mystery spinner. But when you say influential, only one guy really copies his method after that. And the other one is it Bob Appleyard? Bob Apple, whatever his name is. Yeah. He's another one who was really, really he should have been really, really influential, but no one actually copies them. Yeah. And Mendes is copied slightly more. And so he does have an impact, I think, on modern cricket in a way that those other guys didn't. But a lot of that is just to do with the fact that YouTube exists and we could see them. Like I think if Iverson was around in the YouTube age, he would have been far more influential. Anyway, let's call it there. Let's call it there again. Let's stop this podcast again for the second time. I'm not going to say goodbye to Barrett, but I will say goodbye to the audience. Thank you very much to everyone. And I will see you. No, this is my last podcast this week, is it? I will see you next week. Barrett, who knows? You know, he's an enigma wrapped in a sausage roll and everything else. But thank you very much to everyone, and we'll see you again next time.
Let me tell you a story. When I was a kid, people would ask my dad if he wanted me to be Viv Richards, and he always said no. He wanted me to be Boycott because apparently he liked boring things. But anyway, it turned out I could be neither. But thanks to Bodyline t-shirts, I can wear clothes showing both players. The Boycott Stick of Rhubarb is one of my favorite t-shirts. I really like the design. And it's not the only one I love. There's also a WG Grace one where he's in a pedalo, which is a part of my everyday wardrobe now. But there are heaps of other cool shirts on this site, and you can search for them by nations or type, and they seem to add to them all the time. I'm a big fan of the Court Marsh Bold Lily in the Australian collection, and there's also a lovely Morning Everyone in honour of Richie Benaud's great greeting. The English area has the Fast Leg Theory shirt, which I think is a ripper. There's a couple of great West Indian ones I love, including this simple Viv Richards design, and a couple of Kapil Dev t-shirts in the Indian section that I simply must have. I'm not saying that Bodyline t-shirts will have something that you will like, but I will say this: they got me to wear a Jeffrey Boycott inspired t-shirt. And that in itself is a minor miracle.